I'm here with Alan Yett, who has written an excellent book on polycentric missiology. You're the only person who attended the 5 conferences commemorating Edinburgh 1910, is that right?
That's right, the centenary of.
Yes, the 100th anniversary. Okay, so now, if you're the only person who attended all 5, does that mean you're the only person interested in all 5? Or is there a reason why we should all be interested in all 5?
That's a great question. Actually, there were a lot of people who attended multiple of them. So I know a lot of people who attended 2 or 3 of them, or somebody even attended 4 of them. And so it's certainly not lack of interest. I think it just is a lot to ask that people attend 5 different conferences in 1 year. And of course, the 5th one was actually 2 years later, but we'll get to that. But I think for myself, I did it for research purposes because I wanted to do a cross comparison of them. And so certainly all of them were important and all of them had unique things about them. So I don't think that it should be diminished that I was the only one that went to all 5, but I did it so that I could actually provide a bird's eye view perspective of all of them.
Now you, in your book, use a metaphor of a wedding ceremony. The conferences, or any missionary, world missionary conference is like a wedding ceremony. What do you mean by that metaphor?
Right. So basically, a wedding is where something is celebrated and something starts. But if you ever meet a married couple and you were not at their wedding, it certainly does not mean that you cannot participate in their life. And so, but what you can do is you can go back and look at their photo album and look at their wedding ceremony and celebrate with them in that way. So in the same way, the things that come out of these 5 conferences, anyone can participate in them even though they were not at the 5 conferences. But what my book does is it gives you a wedding album. It gives you something to look back on, a snapshot of what actually happened at these conferences, so that you can feel like a part of the history even if you were not actually there. Because there's no way that every Christian on earth can be at every single conference. And so then it's kind of pointless then, because that means only those who are actually at the conference get to experience it. But I wanted to make the conferences accessible to everybody.
Now, the conferences are a celebration or an enactment of world Christianity. Why is world Christianity significant or notable?
World Christianity is, I call it a Copernican shift in the paradigm of Christianity's demographics in this world. So what I mean by that is, Copernicus was the first one to articulate that it was not the sun that revolves around the earth, it was the earth that revolves around the sun. So it was a fundamental paradigm shift of how we view everything. And so for so long in our Christian history, the West has been the epicenter of Christianity, and the rich has been the epicenter of Christianity. And with world Christianity, it is the fact that the shift of the center of gravity of Christianity has shifted to the non-Western world. So, and when you have places like Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America or China being the most Christian places on earth instead of the West, and often that's linked with, developing countries and such. This really changes the way that we do missions. And so, there's so many implications to this, but certainly the shift in the center of gravity does profoundly affect how we understand missions. And this has all happened in the last 50 years.
And in what way were these world missionary conferences commemorating Edinburgh 1910 snapshots of world Christianity then?
Yeah. So my subtitle for my book, Polycentric Missiology, is 21st Century Mission from Everyone to Everywhere. Now that is in contrast to 20th century mission, which is from the West to the rest. Right? So in the 20th century, the center of gravity of Christianity was firmly in the West, and the West would send out missionaries to Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And today, it's from everyone to everywhere. So you get Brazilian missionaries going to the Middle East. You get Chinese going back to Jerusalem. You get African missionaries going to England. I mean, it's all over the place. And so these 5 conferences actually took place on 5 different continents. And so you have Tokyo 2010, which happened in Asia, obviously, and Edinburgh 2010, which happened in Europe, and Cape Town 2010, which is in Africa, and 2010 Boston, which is in North America, and then the Clade 5 conference, which was in Costa Rica, and so that represents Latin America. And so, however, some of them chose to take it very literally, like the centenary, right? Edinburgh 2010. Well, 1910 happened in Edinburgh, therefore 2010 has to happen in Edinburgh.
Okay.
But Cape Town did it the opposite. The Lausanne conference, they tried to be a little bit more subversive. They said, well, if the UK was the center of gravity of Christianity in 1910, what is the center of gravity of Christianity in 2010? Sub-Saharan Africa. So they had it in Cape Town 2010. Okay. So they tried to not do the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, right? So and even Tokyo 2010, Ralph Winter was the one who organized that out of the U.S. Center for World Mission, and he said, all right, instead of having the conference where the center of gravity is, why don't we have the conference where the least number of Christians are? So you pick Japan as representative of that, right? So he said, why should Christian conferences be where all the Christians are? Right. Why don't we make the conference itself missionary and put it in a place which is very non-Christian?
Yeah, very interesting. Setting it in Edinburgh seemed like the wrong place for a World Missionary Conference.
That's right.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you liken World Missionary Conferences on different continents to the four Gospels. What's the parallel there?
Yeah. Basically, a lot of people ask, why do we have 4 Gospels? And there's lots of different reasons for this, but because the Bible is similar to Jesus, who's fully God and fully man, the Bible is fully divinely inspired, but fully human authored. And as such, there's a famous quote from a Boston preacher of the 19th century named Phillips Brooks. And he said, preaching is truth poured through personality. And I think the same thing is true with Scripture, right? It is truth poured through personality. So you have the story of Jesus. Jesus himself never wrote anything. Okay, but we have 4 different men who wrote down how they understood Jesus from 4 different cultural perspectives, right? So Matthew is the Jewish gospel, and Mark is more of the Roman, and Luke is more of the Greek, and John is also Jewish, but more of a mystical kind of Judaism. And so you have these 4 different perspectives on Jesus. Andrew Walls gives an example of this as well in his book, The Missionary Movement in Christian History, and he says, it's kind of like we're all audience members, and we're watching the stage. But we have different seats in the stadium. We're all watching the same play, which is the gospel story, but we have different perspectives, and we can see different things based on our vantage point. And so really what we need is to get a full picture of what's going on stage. We need to have everybody say, well, I saw this. No, well, I saw this. Well, I saw this, right? Put it all together, then you see the full picture. So same with the different continents. You get a Latin American perspective, an Asian perspective, a European perspective, a North American perspective, etc. And you get to see more of the full picture of who God is. So I feel like World Christianity gives us this wonderful opportunity to really understand God, because from multicultural perspectives. I know some people are a little bit leery of this because they think it's relativism, but I think it's not relativism at all. Lest you think 4 different Gospels is relativism, right? And if culture is part and parcel of how we understand God, because we cannot help but look through culture, right? We swim in culture the same way a fish swims in water. And we can't get out of it, but we also need not completely give into it the way liberation theology does, right? So liberation theology is like, well, I'm only going to look at the gospel through the lens of poverty, or through the lens of race, or through the lens of gender, or whatever. No, I mean, those. Of course you have those things, but you don't. We need to not make the opposite mistakes of being totally beholden to our lenses versus denying that we have lenses.
Right.
And so I think culture is part and parcel of how God made us.
You have an interesting gem hidden in a little footnote where you mentioned that maybe Westerners are suspicious of two-thirds world theologies as if they're going to be more liberal for some reason, when in fact often two-thirds world theologies are more orthodox or biblically centered. Maybe you can explain that. You didn't get room to explain that in your footnote.
Sure, absolutely. Well, think about it like this. I know that we in the West often think that we are the true version of Christianity, right? But if an ancient Jewish believer from the first century, right, a follower of Christ, showed up in our American 21st century churches today, I think they would be completely shocked how bizarre this looks to them, right? In terms of the forms and the styles and even the content sometimes, and certainly the community aspects of it. And so what I feel like is a lot of African, Asian, and Latin American cultures actually are more closely resembling first century ancient Jewish culture than 21st century America is. And so when 21st century American Christians say, well, yeah, you know, those African Christians, they're not really Orthodox. African Christianity is just liberal. No, the African Christians read the Bible and they're like, I get this. I see a lot of parallels with my culture and what I read in the Bible. Whereas Western 21st century Christians are sometimes so far afield from where those ancient believers are that it's almost unrecognizable. So I actually think it behooves us to listen to two-thirds world believers to understand the Bible better. For example, there's so many agrarian metaphors in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And most Africans are rural agrarian. They understand all these biblical metaphors. What do we Western, urban, modern Christians we don't understand, It's different. Yeah. Even like worldview, right? Bible was pre-modern. And a lot of two-thirds world people are pre-modern in their worldview as well. We are modern and postmodern. So even the way we think in terms of scientific categories and systematic theology would have been almost unrecognizable to ancient Christians, whereas Africans, Asians, and Latin Americans would get it.
Interesting. Well, one final question. The goal in kind of the legacy of World Missionary Conferences is ecumenism. Let's unify the church, maybe for the task of world evangelization, or maybe for some, it depends on kind of what the goal of ecumenism was there. But you eventually conclude that evangelicalism has a unique advantage for ecumenism. How is that the case?
Evangelicalism, even though some people think it's more narrow-minded as opposed to ecumenism, right? Ecumenism is like we welcome anybody of any Christian tradition, and evangelicals have particular distinctives, right? It's particularly the Bevington quadrilateral of Christocentrism, Biblicism, conversionism, and activism. But I actually think that evangelicalism has gotten a bad rap, not only politically, but because we are seen as being closed-minded and fundamentalist or whatnot, and actually evangelicalism is a broader umbrella than that. Evangelicalism is not a denomination. It's self-consciously not. So it can unite Presbyterians and Baptists and Methodists and Anglicans and whatnot, as long as they subscribe to the Bevington quadrilateral. So as long as you think that the cross is at the center, and you believe in being born again, and that that you must do social justice and these sorts of things, then yes, and the Bible is your supreme authority, then hey, those are enough to establish a sort of trust and a sort of unity, and within that unity, we can go out and do missions together. And I feel like once those things are established, if you say you're evangelical, okay, we understand those four things, then you don't have to do the hard work of ecumenism, as in the World Council of Churches, which seems like they're doing so much to foster unity that they're actually not going ahead and entering the mission field, right? Mm-hmm. And whereas evangelicals say, you know what, we already know what we agree on, so now let's just get out into the mission field and let's do it.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a combination of, on the one hand, self-consciously not aligning with a denomination, but on the other hand saying, and yet we do agree on a number of essentials, and so we found what we agree on almost from the beginning, rather than having to work out what we agree on. We start with that and
Exactly.
can move from there.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you for the discussion on world Christianity and the World Missionary Conferences.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.